Hi, welcome back. So today I'll be sharing my favorite books of 2020. I read a lot of books this year, more than 100, which is more than I normally read, but it's been a crazy year and this is how I coped. So I have a lot of books to talk about. But first, I just want to say that most of these books were 2020 releases. There are just two books which were released before this year. However, the final books in the series, or like a book in the series, came out in 2020 as well. So they kind of technically, like the series technically still ranks as a 2020 release. Now, some of these books are like super popular and everyone knows about them. So I'll talk about the more popular books at the end of the video because I just want to make sure that most people are gonna see like the most underrated books that I want to talk about. Now, the first one I want to start with is A Throne of Swans, which is a Swan Lake retelling. This is a YA fantasy and it follows this young girl. She's part of one of the ruling families of the land where she lives, and since it's a Swan Lake retelling, the ruling families are shapeshifters, but they shift into birds. So our heroine hasn't been able to shift in a very long time, ever since her mother was murdered in front of her. And in this land, if you're one of the ruling families and you cannot shift, it means that you're no different than the people you rule, and so she has to be disinherited. So she and her family, she and her father, they're keeping this a secret. Her father passes away and she's summoned to the capital, where a lot of things start happening. There's a mystery going on, there's some betrayal, there's a great love story. Overall, it had like all the elements that I normally absolutely love in a YA fantasy, and also it had a very good protagonist and a great love interest. So there was a lot of angst, which I'm such a huge sucker for angst, and it was very well written. Everything about it was great. So I highly recommend this one if you're looking for a great story you can dive in and get lost into, with amazing characters, and just it's amazing. Besides, the second book is coming out next month, so it's not gonna be a long wait. It's not gonna be a long wait. Now, another book I absolutely adored, and if I have to choose just one book of this entire year, it's probably gonna be this one, Hold Back the Tide by Melinda Salisbury. So this book, you guys, this book is absolutely phenomenal. I'm so sad that I don't really see people talking about it, and I think that's because it's very hard to kind of describe what it's about without spoiling it, because in my opinion it's best if you dive into this one with absolutely no idea what it's about, because telling you what kind of a story it is a huge spoiler, if that makes sense. So I'm just gonna say that we're following this girl, Alva. The setting is, I'd say, 18th, 19th century Scotland. We never get like a precise time period, but like based on the kind of technology or lack thereof that I have, I'd say 18th, 19th century Scotland. So she lives in this very remote part of Scotland, and she knows that her father murdered her mother years ago. She saw that. This is not really a spoiler because that's like literally the first sentence of the book. The first sentence is, "Here are the rules of living with a murderer," which is amazing. I mean, how can you read that and not just continue plowing on through the book? I don't know. Anyway, so she wants to escape. Like, she has spent the last few years trying to like save money so that she can run away. And this is like how the story starts. This is the only thing I'm gonna say, and the writing is phenomenal. The characters are amazing. There's a great male character. I absolutely love him as well. All the characters are very kind of deep, even though it's a very short book. And it amazes me how the author managed to give them this depth with just 300 pages. I don't know, the story is amazing. It's, I'd say, unlike anything I've ever read, but that would be technically not true, because on one hand the story is quite simple, on the other hand it's so emotional and so heartbreaking and just so impactful that in that sense it's like nothing I've ever read. But on the other hand, it's not like the most convoluted plot with a lot of, you know, intricacies and stuff. So it's really hard to describe this book, and I'm pretty sure I'm not doing it justice. But if you're looking for a short book which will just punch you right in the heart with absolutely stunning writing and absolutely amazing characters and plot which will leave you surprised, I highly recommend this one. My next recommendation is a book that I finished last week, and I'm so happy that even in December I still managed to find a new favorite of mine, which I can include in my favorites of the year video. And this is Where Dreams Descend. So this book generated a little bit of hype. I mean, I'd say more than a little bit of hype, but it generated hype. And then after a certain point, I cannot hear anyone talking about it. And the reviews it's got on Goodreads are not very high. They're low, but like they could be higher. I give this one 5 stars, obviously, if I'm talking about it now. But I can see like why not everyone has rated it 5 stars, because it's a strange story in a sense. It's not like your typical YA fantasy. It's, I'd say, slower, but that's because it's so much more character driven. It's about this girl, Kalia. She has lived her whole life in this manor in the woods. She's never left it. This manor is a gaming den slash cabaret slash just a, you know, entertainment house of sorts. And once she gets older, she starts performing because she's a magician. So she starts performing in the manor where she grew up in. And the person who took her in, he dies, and his young son comes and he starts teaching Kalia magic because he's a magician as well. So she wants to explore the world. However, she has absolutely no knowledge of the world outside of this manor. And so one day she discovers that the son, Jack, who is her mentor and her friend, has been lying to her, and a lot of things happen from there. So she goes to this city, which is like an ice city, in the middle of the forest as well. And it's a city that's been kind of missing from the map for a very long time. Something happened there a long time ago, and people have kind of closed it off. They don't let outsiders in. So it's a huge mystery. This city is a huge mystery. So she goes there because they've finally decided to open their gates and have people come and try to resurrect their city. And they try to do that by having a competition for magicians. So Kali hears of that, and off she goes to join this competition of magicians because she wants to compete and just explore more of the world. And there is a disappearance, multiple disappearances. There's a huge mystery that's related to like what happened in the city. There's a huge mystery regarding every single one of the characters, because there are 3 main characters. So every single one of them has this huge mystery surrounding them, including Kalia. It's all very mysterious, it's all very intriguing. We're being fed bits and pieces here and there, and to me that was like the perfect form of storytelling, because I'm a sucker for mysteries. Like, this is what makes books interesting, in my opinion. Just constantly striving to learn more and more and more, instead of just like following a character and their like life story. I'm just not interested in this kind of stories. So this was the perfect book for me. The thing absolutely loved was the relationship between the characters, because all three of these characters have such complex relationships that it was absolute joy to read about them. And there was so much angst as well, and as I said before, I'm a sucker for angst, and it was great. It was great. The writing was so beautiful. There wasn't a single thing I did not enjoy. But as I said at the beginning, I see why why a lot of people have not rated this higher, because it's not the fastest paced of books. We're following the magicians throughout this competition, but the action is very slow at times. Still, like, I immensely enjoyed it because of the characters, because of all the mysteries, because the world is interesting, and because there was so much to this world that we didn't know, and just so much more that we can learn. Besides, it had the perfect ending. I think this is gonna be a duology, so I really hate it when we have a series and then the first book kind of wraps everything up and then there's nothing left for the second book. But this one ended in a perfect way in my opinion, so I highly recommend it. The next book I have is Incendiary by Zoraida Cordova. This is the start of a new young adult fantasy series. I mean, most of these books here are YA fantasy. I think I've got only 2 adult fantasies. Anyway, so this is a Hispanic inspired fantasy set in a world where magic is outlawed and all the magicians are being persecuted. That's like a very common fantasy setting, but our main character, she is one of the magicians who can steal memories and read memories in general. So she's feared even among her own people, even among the magicians. She's feared, she's hated, and because it's a very dangerous skill. And basically she's like the only one, or one of the few of her kind left. So when she was young, she was captured by the religious order of the kingdom, which this religious order is inspired by the Holy Inquisition, and it's modeled very heavily on the Inquisition. So that was very interesting for me to read, because I've studied about the Inquisition when I was in uni, and it's very interesting. Horrible, but interesting. So she was captured when she was a little girl, and the Inquisition manipulated her so that she was just a little girl, so she didn't know what was happening, but they used her skills against her own people. So because of her and her abilities, the Inquisition managed to catch a lot of people, a lot of the magicians. And at one point when she was, I think, 10, she kind of understood what was happening, and she managed to escape. And she's been living with this guilt inside of her ever since, because her actions, even though involuntarily, like she wasn't aware of that, her actions managed to cause a lot of grief, and a lot of murders happened because of her. And so this, in my opinion, is one of the best conflicts that I've ever encountered in a book, because on one hand, the main character is being plagued by this horrible guilt, which it's not something she was responsible for, but at the same time it was her abilities that caused all this destruction. But at the same time, she was a little girl, so she didn't mean it. She didn't mean for any of this to happen, which made for a great conflict. Like, she was being plagued by this the whole book, and it was so well done. It was absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. That conflict alone made the whole book 10 times better than if it was like your typical, if it was a more typical YA fantasy. I absolutely adore that. I believe this is gonna be a duology, so next book is coming out next year, I believe around the middle of next year or something, so it's not a huge wait. And I absolutely adored the story, but more I adored the main character and her struggles, and I loved all the supporting characters as well. I'm not gonna say anything because there's gonna be a spoiler, but there's this one character who is absolutely amazing. He starts off as this just horrible person, and we slowly uncover more and more about him, and it was amazing. So next up is one of the 2 books or series which I said were published before 2020. However, the 3rd book in this series came out this year, and I read it this year, so it kind of counts. But I read all 3 books that are out now this year. This is the Black Witch Chronicles. I'm just gonna put these down because they're quite heavy. I'm just gonna hold the 3rd book that came out this year, The Shadow Wand. So this series, obviously I cannot talk about the 3rd book which I read because it's gonna be a spoiler. There are 2 books before that, so I'm just gonna give you a premise of the 1st book. This series, when it came out, was critiqued, like some people critiqued it for being very racist. I really don't think that's the case. I think like the whole point of the book and the series, the 1st book, The Black Witch, is just to show how bad racism is. Like, this is literally the whole point. I honestly cannot see how anyone can read this book and think it promotes racism when it combats it. Like, it does everything in its power to show that racism is bad. Anyway, that's up to personal interpretation. If someone's offended, that's their right to be, but I personally think that it was very well done. It really showed the exact journey a person who's been kind of groomed and lived in this very capsulated environment and was being taught that they're the best and their country's the best and everyone else is a savage, and the progression of that person, like through their own experience, and like the more they start getting to know the world and different people and different customs, etc., and how they change. Because our main character was, yes, very racist at the beginning, but it was because she was groomed to be that way. And the more she learned about the world, the more she started fighting that racism, and she became a champion against racism. So anyway, the first 2 books are set in the school setting, the academic setting of the university, and then this book finally moves on from the academic setting. The world is extremely rich. It's one of the richest worlds I've seen in YA fantasy. It's, in terms of like complexity and just different races and different nations and different customs, it's on par with any other adult high fantasy novel. It's got fae, it's got elves, it's got humans. It's amazing. It's so interesting. And all these people, they have different customs, they have different traditions, different it was amazing. Like, you get to explore all of them, and it's so rich and so interesting, so well written. The characters are amazing. It's got amazing love stories, I tell you, like amazing. It's got a main character who is young and naive at the beginning without being absolutely annoying. She has great personal growth. It's just the perfect series for me. Like, I think it's such an amazing series, and especially this book, like the 3rd book that came out this year. Oh my god, it was absolutely amazing. Like, the love interest is to die for, one of my new crushes. Absolutely amazing. This series is gonna contain 5 books, so we're nowhere near done. Okay, so next up I have another series which the final book came out this year, but the first 2 books obviously came out before that, and I still haven't read the final book, so I'm just gonna talk about the first and the second book. And this is the Ace of Shades series by Amanda Foody. Now, this is a new favorite of mine. I absolutely adore this series. I want to talk about like the second and the final book. I'm just gonna focus like on the premise of the plot of the first book, because otherwise I'm gonna spoil it for you. But we're following Anne. Her name is Ariane, and Anne is the short of that. I know it's kind of confusing, but Anne is looking for her adoptive mother who disappeared some time ago. And this world is so interesting. Like, the magic is very unique. It's kind of reminiscent of a Brandon Sanderson magic system, because as everyone knows, Brandon Sanderson has got like the weirdest, most interesting magic systems. This magic system is like that. It's so very unique. And the main character, she's like this prim and proper young lady, and for once the main character doesn't want to be a badass fighter. She wants to be a proper young lady, which is awesome. I mean, I love it. I love that it shows that a woman can be independent and strong without being physically strong and going and fighting all the guys, which is great as well. But like, I love seeing different points, different aspects of a woman be strong. So she's a prim and proper young lady, and she arrives in this Las Vegas, New Rains, it's called New Rains, where she just doesn't fit, because like she's surrounded by these casinos and gangsters and just very weird people in general. And she starts looking for her mother, and the only clue she's got is the name of this one person that she knew from her mother, and she goes to find him, and like the whole action unravels from there. It's amazing. It's just amazing. I absolutely adore, and I absolutely adore Levi, the male main character, because we follow both of their points of view. Levi, while Anne is trying to find her mother and just wants to be a proper young lady, Levi wants to be like the king of the underworld, and he does everything in his power to do it. He makes a lot of mistakes along the way, but I absolutely loved his ambition, because he was unapologetically ambitious. They were amazing. The plot is amazing. The writing is amazing. The level of detail these books have is amazing. Highly, highly, highly recommend them. Absolutely amazing. Okay. I've only got 3 books left, and these are the most popular ones, so I'm just gonna like quickly mention them. One of them is Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. This is the newest Shadowhunter book. This one is set in Edwardian London, and it follows the children of the main cast from the Inferno Devices. Again, like with all the recent Cassie Clare books, we follow a very large cast of characters here. It's all the children, so there's a lot of nostalgia. If you've read the Inferno Devices, I really loved being back into this world. I think that with every single book, Cassie Clare's stories and writing becomes better and better. I loved Cordelia, I loved James. I absolutely hated what's her face? I really hated that girl. What was she called? Come on. Grace. I absolutely hated Grace. So overall, it inspired a lot of emotions in me, both positive and negative. I adored this, gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Cannot wait for the next book. Next are the 2 adult fantasy books. The first one is Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas. I know a lot of people absolutely hate this book, and I know that even more people absolutely adore it. I happen to fall in the adore category. This was absolutely phenomenal in my opinion, in the sense that it was innovative, because the action is set in an alternate world. It's not in our own world, but it's got all the elements of an urban fantasy story, because it's got vampires, it's got fae, it's got werewolves. So like all the typical aspects of urban fantasy, but set in a different world, which I don't think a lot of people dare to do that, because I don't think publishers would generally take such a risk. But since it's Sarah J. Maas and she could do whatever she wants, I'm so glad that this was published, and I'm so glad that she decided like to write a story such as this one, because honestly we don't see that combination very often, and I think this is what makes this book so unique. Apart from that, Bryce, the main character, was absolutely phenomenal. I don't happen to like Sarah J. Maas's main characters. I don't like Feyre, I don't like Selena or / Alien, whatever. But Bryce, I love Bryce. She was great. She was absolutely great. I loved Hunt. But then again, like Sarah J. Maas's male characters are always amazing. Like, I happen to love all her male characters, unlike her female characters. So Hunt was amazing. And a lot of people complain that there's a lot of exposition because like the first 150 pages are like exposition. I personally didn't mind because I really loved getting all the backstory, and then the final 200 pages are just mind-blowing. I thought like the climax happened at one point, and then I was like, oh well, this happened now, I don't know what we're gonna do for the next 200 pages. And then it turned out that it wasn't the climax, and it just went on and on and on, and there was 200 pages of just continuous action and stuff happening, which really blew my mind. It was amazing. I don't really think I should recommend it because everyone knows of this book and either really wants to read it or doesn't want to read it because they hate on the author. So again, I absolutely loved it, and I really don't see why people are complaining about it, but anyway. And the final book that I want to talk about is From Blood and Ash. So this is romantic fantasy. It's Jennifer L. Armentrout's first high fantasy, and it's great in the sense that I loved it because there's a lot of mystery going on. We don't know anything about the world because the main character doesn't know anything about the world, and mostly because it had great characters and an amazing love story. There was a lot of angst as well and a lot of mystery, as I already mentioned. The fantasy elements are, I don't want to spoil anything for anyone because I've previously talked about this book on my channel and I always categorize it as a certain type of story, but then I realized that maybe me saying that it's a certain type of story would be a spoiler for someone because we go into the story without knowing that. So I wouldn't say anything more. I'm pretty sure that you've seen this book everywhere because it is literally everywhere. But it follows Poppy, who's a maiden, the chosen one. She's been kept under lock and key her whole life, and she is just waiting for this one moment in her life when she's gonna ascend. We don't really know what that is, so don't worry. We find that very, very late on in the book what that means actually, because Poppy herself doesn't know what it means to ascend. She only knows that once she ascends, she's gonna be immortal, and that's about it. So she lives her whole life waiting to ascend, and it turns out that things are not exactly as she thinks they are, and it seems that she's been lied to her whole life. So slowly she starts unraveling a lot of mysteries, a lot of lies, a lot of secrets, and yeah, the action takes from there. It's amazing. I really like it. It's a chunker. It's 600 pages, but I think it's a very digestible book. The writing style is very easy to get through, so I highly recommend it. Okay, so these were my favorite books of 2020. I highly, highly, highly recommend every single one of them. And yeah, let me know which was your favorite book of 2020, and I'll see you next time. Bye.